And now this third section of the second lecture about Tepper, which is called husbandry. And I put this word in quotation marks because it's one of those interesting words which suggest care of a certain kind. The concept of husbandry, as once practiced, was care that implied the handling of living creatures, domesticated animals, and it can be extended to the earth, to tilling the soil, mining as well. And if you're interested in this concept at a deeper level, have a look at Carolyn Merchant's first book. I think it was her first book. First, certainly the most famous first book, called The Death of Nature. And Merchant is very good about tracing down the differences between basically how men and women understand nature. There are other. If you're interested in this, get in touch with me. If you want more reading, I'm happy to give it to you. The issue of being ecologically correct isn't simply one of green politics, though, for Tepper. It has to do with a way of thinking, a way of seeing gender and education, the world around one, as being something with which we are intimately connected. And what that means is that we have a caring relationship to it, so this idea of husbandry is quite an antique one, and I think it's to some extent one we've lost. That you care for, in a way which is an intimate relationship with living creatures in the land, which is also, of course, living. So here's an example of that kind of dream of sustainability from the mid 90s. Yeah, the mid 90s. Okay, have a look at this. Okay, so that is an example of, it's Kevin Costner's sort of Don Quixote jousting at windmills. I mean, he had made was very successful with Dances with Wolves, which takes up the indigenous populations on the plains, and one of the indigenous population tribes on the plains, and a man who essentially has had it with war. And it's a very intriguing film on that account, because it basically says he's just burned out and he's not going to function anymore. So he just keeps going west until he outruns the war, and then he comes in contact with the one of the native populations that's there, and they teach him basically how to live. They teach him how to care for the world. Costner then went on to take this character and make a series of films which are very intriguingly take up the same political issues. So you'll see this in Waterworld, which is the thing I just showed you, and also in The Postman, which is based on a David Brin novel. And they actually made a much better film out of it. But the idea is sustainability. So, the first example, essentially, of peeing in a cup and getting drinking water out of the same still that he's got running there, within a few seconds, is a dramatic example, basically, of water reclamation as we should be doing it. Why do we use fresh water? Why are we watering our lawns at all? We shouldn't have lawns in this environment. If there isn't enough rain to have a green lawn, you shouldn't have a green lawn. We shouldn't be trying to grow grass. It's a stupid thing. We got the grass habit from either the American South which gets a lot of rain and heat, and England, which has got these green lawns, which are astonishing because they've been maintained for hundreds of years by a constant, near constant state of English drizzle, which produces these incredible emerald green lawns. Well, that's not the climate we live in. I mean, yes, if you live in the Pacific North, sure, you can have a green lawn, no watering needed. But so why are we watering? Why are we taking water, necessary water, when people don't have good drinking water in communities around us, and putting it on lawns? What is that about? Oh, it's about vanity. It's about what we think the world should look like. Okay. So this idea of being ecologically astute is something that Costner wants to point out. And I just like this example because it's funny. But it is an actual example of what would it look like if you had to take care of every single drop of water. And Chernin fails to see the importance of this way of living. And there's this wonderful moment. And the twins, I have to say that the Tonia and Kostya are two delightful creations because they just are so knowing and at the same time naive. They're open to the world and they're very likable characters. And so at one point they sit with Chernin and they read his fortune, and he's a dead man. I mean, he just doesn't know it yet. And Chernin he's looking at a card. It looks like a harvest to me. Antonia says, he has cut all the grain, but has replanted none on 215. And this is the summation of the way that men treat the world and the way that capital treats the world, which is that we have taken and we have not given. And we believe capitalism is based on the idea that we can go on taking and never giving forever. And that you all know this is not this is not sustainable in any way. But so here it sums up the short-sightedness of the men and the nightmare that we will find in Holy Land, where they're in a cycle of using up everything they've got, and it's abusive. It's a rapist nightmare. Oh, it's a rapist dream, I suppose, and it's a nightmare for everybody else who's caught up in it, but particularly the women. There are very few possessions. Of the few goods or slaves, basically indicates in Holy Land the demise of the whole system. It's just about to collapse, but it hasn't yet. And so what's going to happen is the people who are left, not the men, I don't care about them, but the women will be tortured to death. And that's the problem. And Chernin falls right for it. This is what he's after. And so Chernin says, if you have a baby, nobody else can have you. Stavia says, ownership. Whoever impregnates me owns me. Is that it? Chernin says, that's it. His face blurted. He blurted his face angry on 260. So ownership is pushed to the limit. And Tepper takes aim here at fundamentalist religion, which is in this case bears more than a small resemblance to Protestant Calvinism, which is responsible for the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the creation in 1560 of what will become America. And you can map any extreme religion onto this idea of possession of women who are now impregnated by your particular special sperm. Oh my goodness, this is the most important thing in the world. It's like, oh please, get a grip on yourself. Life doesn't care. And there's no, ejaculation does not ownership make. But anyway, so when we get to Holy Land, we see this, harsh evangelical religion, and they deal with Stavia, and they say there's no decency to her at all. Decent women didn't permit themselves to do anything that would stir a man. They sure didn't do it on purpose. Decent women hid themselves and shaved their heads and walked with it kind of bent over. Not this one, not Stavia on 226. And so this is why basically they are dealt with like implements. And at one point, and Tepper is brutal about this. She's, that one of the boys basically goes to one of the older women and says, when I'm raping somebody, it's not going that well. It's not easy. And she says, oh, you got to use some fat. You have to use some lard. And he says, oh, like a wagon axle, huh? on page 209.